Well, welcome to the Business of Jewelry podcast. I'm Jimmy DeGroat, and that is
Peter Smith. Great to be here,
Peter
Jimmy.
Smith. He's a beautiful man. And okay, so we're always talking about lately in our prior podcasts, we've talked about things very much so from the jeweler side, from the retailer side of things. And I'll admit, Peter, I've gone to trade shows and I've got a real what's in it for me attitude when I walk up to a vendor. And, you've got so much experience from the supplier side. You've got so much experience also from the retailer side. So let's chat a little bit today and help us understand. We'll call me a retailer today, right? And you a supplier or vendor. Help us understand a little bit about, some of the frustrations that you folks have or that vendors have with regard to putting out a product line and the people and the time and the expense that's involved in all of that. It's got to be tremendous. So help us out here.
It's interesting, Jimmy, that you start off with, coming to the trade shows or showing up with some sense of what's in it for me. Right. Because there is a little bit of that, certainly. And, when you reached out and we talked about the possibility of doing this topic, one of the things that sort of emerged for me as a kind of a fulcrum or a sort of pivot point for what passes for the relationships or what drives the friction between vendors and retailers is often returns, right? Some version of returns. And the genesis for a lot of that tends to happen at the trade shows, right? So the stuff that you're referring to, that people show up and what's in it for me and things happen, and thereafter, the whole world sort of seems to fall apart. So what
you're talking about here is I've got dated inventory. I want to return it. I want to exchange it. That type of return, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could be, I want to return it. I want to exchange it. I don't want to pay for it. There could be any number of things. So
right.
Take it from this perspective, right? So let's assume that the vendor didn't shove the product down the retailer's throat. Right? Let's assume that the retailer actually used their free will and bought the product without coercion or without threat to life and limb. Like, let's imagine that happened. And by the way, it does happen, right? In fact, it's the norm, right? So despite not conforming to the convenient narrative around this, oh, you made me buy it, that is generally how things work. The retailer comes, they sit down at the show, oftentimes they sit there, they make their decisions, they go away, and thereafter it seems things either work well or they don't. And when they don't work well, it seems to be disproportionately on the vendor to sort of fix it. So first, here's what I'm going to say, and you and I have talked about this a lot in the past, not just on our previous podcast, but suppliers are in the business. Suppliers are in the business of selling stuff, right? And they shouldn't have to apologize for that. That's why they exist. And so I think on occasion, we sort of lose sight of that a little bit. Well, who are these guys? Well, those guys, just like you, are in the business of selling stuff. And yet somehow we act as though, they should sort of apologize for it. So from their perspective, meaning from the vendor's perspective, from the brand's perspective, exerting some pressure is wholly justified when the product is best-selling product or it's a no-brainer product, right? Now, It's less so when the vendor or the brand knows the product is a dud, right? They know it's a mistake and they're selling it anyway because they own it, they made it, it's on the shelf. So I'm not talking about that stuff. I'm talking about when they know it works, it is their job to appropriately apply a little bit of pressure to have the retailer buy it. Now, look, selling shit compounds the non-performing inventory situation,
sure,
right?
Absolutely.
And that hurts the retailers. It curtails their available cash to buy. The products that actually work are not replenished and all that. So we understand that. That ultimately kills everything. But what we're talking about here is general ongoing business where we're not talking about a massive amount of risk, right?
Right.
So vendors will often provide, we know this as a fact, they'll often provide extended terms for retailers, right? Sometimes even on the best-selling products. And they'll still have to fight to get a replenish. So in some cases, and I've certainly lived this, you give terms on best-selling product, the product sells, it's not even paid for yet, and the retailer doesn't want to replenish it. That just blows my head, right? That's just simply terrible business. So
That's terrible. That's what I was going to say. I was going to say a much worse word for it, but thank you for saying that.
We're being somewhat, clean on this podcast, but
yeah, but if I'm a grocery store and I sell eggs, when the eggs are gone, I get more eggs.
If I'm selling the latest Apple iPhone and it's gone, I got to get more, right? In other words, whatever's working, and I think at some point we should have Sherry on the podcast and get into some of this stuff in a little bit more, a little bit more detail. But if you think about this from the vendor's perspective, right? So after the terms are satisfied, then the retailers turn around and request a rebalance, as though they've no responsibility for the goods at all. Okay, doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Retailers are happy to blame the vendor for the lack of sell-through. Now, they may or may not have a good sales team. They may or may not advertise the product. They may or may not merchandise the product appropriately. I've actually known cases where the product never made it into the showcase, right? It's put underneath. It's in the safe.
Oh, yeah. It's in the safe.
Yeah. They may or may not have, good CRM to inform their best customers about what's new and to drive traffic in a way that you and I've talked about previously, which is, that returning traffic giving you a 70% greater chance of closing that sale and a 30% higher ticket, but yet somehow the huge numbers of retailers don't do that. They may have a store that hasn't been renovated in 20 years, but somehow all of that is the vendor's issue.
It's their fault.
It didn't sell.
I was just talking with a good friend of ours, and he said, I've seen junior high school football coaches do way more training on a weekly basis than we do as jewelers who have millions of dollars invested in this. So that's a training talk. We'll talk about that some other time, but you're absolutely right. And I've been there several times where the new box it's 3 months old and it's sitting in the safe yet. So we won't go down that road, but it does happen.
And literally, as you know, I spent a chunk of my time in retail way back when, and I spent a significant portion on the branded side and the supplier side subsequent to that. You would be shocked at how often I have heard over the years, we never actually put that out yet. Now there's a requirement to take it back, but it never actually made it into the case. Or you get some version of, Sally didn't think it was good. She didn't like it. Therefore, she didn't sell it. Now, Sally didn't buy it. Sally wasn't at the, JCK or Luxury or Centurion or, Select or whatever it was purchased. But Sally gets to decide that it will or won't work. And that is true of not just generic products, but also true of certain brands, right? Where a given salesperson or more decide, well, I don't particularly care for that, therefore I'm not going to sell it. Instead of the owner sitting there and saying, look, here's why we invested in this. Here's what our expectations are for this brand or product. Let's have a conversation about what we need to do to get you into that same place, because not getting there is not an option. Right. Because as the owner of the business or the chief merchandiser or the head buyer of the business, I've made this decision. We don't debate it after the product comes in.
Yep.
As simple as that.
And very frequently, we don't have a proper launch of the product. Meaning, let's call the vendor up and let's get them in on a webinar, or let's get them in here, bring us pizza and donuts, what have you, and talk about, here's the features and benefits of this line. Here's what we did. Here's a movie that shows how we make it and things like that. So I would say lack of a failure to properly launch. Lack of a failure to properly launch.
Yeah. And in some cases, Jimmy, we know this to be true. It's not always true, but in some cases, you're talking about vendors providing displays, providing training. They may be providing incentives. They may, in fact, have some kind of a reasonable exchange. In other words, if you share certain aspects of the business, automation, data, et cetera, we'll give you a return privilege up to X percent. In other words, there may be a whole plan there, but still, at the end of the day, it is on the retailer to execute that plan.
Right? The vendor.
Yeah, I mean, short of an event or, some kind of a trunk show or something, The vendor is not going to get behind your cases and sell it. I mean, at some point, that is on the retailer to make that happen.
This podcast is brought to you by the Jewelry Store Sales Training Institute, a Train Retail production. Listen, if you want to grow your sales, if you want to grow your team, if you want to grow your culture and your efficiency as an owner, I think the Train Retail Weekly Sales Training Program is for you. We create weekly engaging discussions among your team, starting with a 10-minute sales and operations video and then assisted notes so that you can discuss how this concept works in your store, with your people, and your market. You can give it a try absolutely free by going to trainretail.com and use coupon code FREEMONTH. That's free month, all one word, all lowercase. Then after you like it, it's as affordable as $99 a month. Imagine bringing your team through a complete sales curriculum every single year. Talk about growth. Give it a whirl at trainretail.com. No commitments, and you can cancel at any time. So just imagine what your sales team could achieve by implementing just one great principle every single week. Trainretail.com.
The big talk, when I'm at a show is this is a partnership, right? We're talking about the word partnership. And I think maybe that's lost a little of its zhuzh in recent years because it really does take a partnership. I mean, my goodness, again, back to my original point, the incredible investment a company has to make I'm not just filling one jewelry store. I might be filling 300 doors or 800 doors or 1,500 doors here. Yeah. That's a lot of jewelry. That's a lot of investment. That's a lot of playing banker, for these jewelers and a lot of it. So I'm thinking of the word partnership in that as retailers, we got to do our part in this partnership.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point. I think there's a very skewed sense of what partnership is about, right? A good partnership, again, I'm speaking from my perspective, and I think that, like you at this point, we kind of sit in the middle space, both working with vendors, working with retailers, wanting the best interest of everybody. So it's not like we've got a dog in this fight, but a good partnership has to be a shared vision, right, for the relationship and the performance of the brand. Let's say it's a brand situation. So it has to be an open and honest communication about what's expected on both sides. Mm-hmm. And it fundamentally recognizes that both parties need to be successful. Because if the vendor, if he's celebrating a sell-in and it doesn't sell through, then that is not a success. Right. And if the retailer sells it through, but does not then replenish it so that you're feeding, to be somewhat repetitive on this, you're feeding what's working. Mm-hmm. That is not a mutually successful situation. And so, as I sort of was thinking about this, it seems to me that for far too many, the notion of good partnership is I get everything I want. Right? I hate to put it in those terms, but I have seen it and have lived it for so long. If the retailer, if you do everything the retailer wants, that is oftentimes the retailer's definition of a good partnership. That's not a partnership.
Right.
In fact, that they have a word for that. It's called bullying, right? Yeah. Especially so with some of the higher profile retailers where they say, this is what I want, and you're going to do it, or I'll take my business elsewhere. That's not a partnership. Now, oftentimes they'll use the term partnership in making those demands, but a good partnership cannot be the proxy for I get everything I want. That's just simply makes no sense. That's bullying, nothing short of bullying.
Well, and one of the things that I've learned throughout the years is that you have to be a good steward of your money so that when you do sell, you can pay for that. Okay. And you can pay to replenish. I know a lot of people there's a lot of memo out there, right? Yeah. There's a lot of memo out there. And to me, that adds to the responsibility of the retailer because now you're getting a lot here. You're getting a store or a couple cases full of merchandise. And by golly, you need to be a good steward of your money so that you are A, reordering, replenishing, and B, paying for it as it sells. So
I think that's a big thing. The whole notion, Jimmy, of memo is probably a podcast in and of itself, because I think it is.
Yeah.
Again, it is oftentimes a function of an actual plan, right? Where the retailer and the vendor will sit down and they'll lay out a plan that will work for both. And all too often it is, I'll put whatever and whenever into my case because I'm not paying for it. And if it sells, that's great. And if it doesn't sell, that's no problem because I didn't pay for it. I can just send it back, to the vendor. Now, for me, that kind of stuff makes my head explode because my thought process is and always has been linear case-based productivity, right? So I have a finite amount of case space and I want to maximize the return I get in that case space. Yep. And so if you have so much case space that you can comfortably, bring one, bring all, and just load it up with what might be the right product, might not be the right product, I would suggest you got to get rid of some cases because that's not the world we're living in, right? The whole paradox of choice, less is more world doesn't lend itself to massive amounts of cases just readily stocked, with memo product. So for memo, for me, should be it should be no different than if it was acid. In other words, we should be very strategic about what the product is, what the expectation is around it, what the communication is, and what the expected return is in that product, such that both the vendor wins and the retailer wins. And I wish I believed that happened more. I think far too often, that because it's not quote unquote being paid for, nobody takes it very, very seriously. And that tells me one of two things. Either it's the wrong product or it's the right product, but you're not going to act like it is.
Right. And one simple way that I've overcome this is to disassociate myself. I look at the numbers. Okay, what's performing? And then, which cases, this is just like your investment portfolio, which cases are performing and to what extent are they performing and why? And asking those questions. Yeah, we can tend to be lackadaisical about things that I have no investment in this case, so I don't care about it. Well, shame on you. No, you should.
Exactly.
You have why? Because you have your vendor's investment in this. Your partner.
I think if it might be worth going back to the earlier points about whether you're showing up at a trade show or you're sitting down with that with that vendor. I have said for years, and I believe it to be true, that when we start to look at trade shows more as places that have meaningful business meetings. And not just really on both sides, let me go have some fun and spend. Yeah. Or as from the vendor side, let me just sell. But we actually have business meetings, and then the appropriate product to execute that business strategy is what ends up, getting purchased and getting sold. It seems to me that makes an awful lot of sense. And so the idea that you would go, and I know this to be true, that you have retailers who would stop replenishing in some cases weeks or months ahead of a show, so they'd have a open to buy when they go to a show, and then they're buying the very things they should have been buying and, more importantly, been selling prior to the show.
You don't need to go to shows for that.
It doesn't make any. I mean, maybe it feels good for certain people to show up at a vendor and be able to sort of honor them and by giving them an order, et cetera. But imagine if you had that time to talk about what's working, what's not working, and you were able to devote that time to saying, okay, let's have a look and let's have a conversation about what is new, and where we think that may or may not fit into my business. And then if I'm taking a risk on new, which is to say, you as the vendor, you don't know whether this will work or not because you've done your R&D, you've spent your money, you assume and hope it's going to be successful, but it may not be successful. I'm willing as a retailer to take that on. What will happen if it doesn't work? Let's talk about that now at this show. What's the plan if that doesn't work? Because if there actually is a plan, I'm going to feel a whole lot better about bringing it in. And that might be a small percentage of my budget, right, when I go to shows. So I think even there it gets back to honest communication, a conversation about mutually successful stuff, not one-sided success, as in, as a vendor, I get to dump a whole bunch of product on you and be damned whether it works or it doesn't. Or as a retailer, I buy a bunch of stuff and then I'm going to, use it as a hammer to beat you up if it doesn't work, but hey, what do we really think the best thing to do for this business? And, I'm not sure everybody would always agree with it, because when do they ever? But my view was always, I wanted to know as much as I could know about the retailer's business.
Yeah.
And I wanted to make sure, and it was a lesson I learned back in the 90s from Fred Levenger at Calibri, where if selling in to a large extent means nothing, selling through means everything.
Right. Exactly.
And selling through starts with those conversations, Jimmy, right? It starts with why are we doing this? Why are we having this conversation? And it requires on both parts an honesty and a commitment to ensuring that it is successful. And that doesn't mean sitting under the case, and it doesn't mean let me take a 6 months or 3 months or 6 months or 9 months to pay for it. And then if it hasn't worked real well because I never really got behind it, well, I'll just ask you to take it back anyway. As though somehow, and the vendor doesn't need to pay people or put inventory on the shelf. Because if the inventory is not on the shelf, I'm going to beat you up over that. I ordered it. Now you're telling me it's going to be 4 weeks or 6 weeks. So
you said a really good thing, though. You just said a few minutes ago, you said we're talking about asking those proper questions. And I love that when I could have a conversation with a vendor and they're asking me things like, what are your typical price points? What's your price point on bridal? What's your sell through on already mounted goods versus semi mounts, things like that. Were those great questions, just like when we're selling on the retail behind the showcase. Great questions lead to great partnerships, because I'm not going to stick you with a bunch of VS1 goods that aren't going to sell in your market, where you're selling $1,500 bridal out the door all the time, that type of thing. So good point and good questions. And I love that you mentioned about case loading. I've had so many vendors. It's like, why does my case look like a sea of jewelry? There's no style here. Anyway, but we won't get into that.
Hi, this is Peter Smith of the Retail Smiths. If you're a supplier, brand, or manufacturer looking to grow your business in the U.S., let's talk. I've walked that walk over a 4 decades career in the jewelry business, and I can help you to reach your goals. If you're a retailer or supplier looking to inspire your sales team, I've got a sales masterclass you really need to experience. And finally, if you're looking for keynotes for upcoming meetings or events on the future of retail jewelry, on hiring, on great store managers, or on sales psychology, you can reach me at theretailsmiths@gmail.com or on LinkedIn. That's theretailsmiths@gmail.com or on LinkedIn. Look forward to hearing from you.
What are some of the biggest issues or hardships for vendors that from your end of things?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them. So I think one of the things I'd point out is the cost of distribution to a really fragmented retailer base, right? So if you think, again, I've said this many, many times, but we had, in the 80s, when I first moved over here, we had 40,000 points to sell for retail. We've got about 17,000 today. Now that includes, of course, all of the majors and department stores and everything. So to a large extent, the retailer base has contracted in a tremendous way over the last 2 or 3 decades. And so there's no real easy way to get to those retailers, right? If we accept, and I know you and I do, if we accept that you have to be in front of retailers on occasion, right? You can't run your entire business via email or phone calls. Once in a while, somebody's got to show up and shake a hand and engage with a sales person. So I think that the cost of getting out to retailers is a huge thing for a lot of these vendors. And then related to that, and especially so, by the way, if they're trying to build a base of retailers, right? So if they're newer or smaller, and they're trying to build a base of retailers, that requires many, many visits over an extended period of time. And that requires, paying people to do it. The related issue then is you and I know so many people in this business who 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, we could have pointed to and said, this guy or that girl are out there and they're covering this territory. And for so many of those folks now, they've retired.
Yeah. Yep.
They've retired or they're gone into different businesses. I mean, I could, name a whole bunch of people who are no longer in the business. And those
So are
folks,
vendors having the same employment problems as retailers are?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And look, I'm not talking about even in their place of business. That goes for that goes without saying. Administrative and inventory folks and people in the shop and all of that. But it's people who travel on the road. I'm not seeing a lot of young folks. In fact, I've got one of my clients who's desperately looking to hire some folks out in the field and is offering what I consider to be a very reasonable package and is having real difficulty getting them.
Yeah.
So I think you're not seeing the backfill, right, in terms of younger folks coming in willing to do this job. And again, we could talk for an hour and a half about why that might be, but it nonetheless is. I think you also then have the uncertainty if you're in any way, shape, or form related to the diamond business, you have the uncertainty around the pricing on the diamond side of things, which make it very, very challenging. And then I think just cutting through the noise of all of the suppliers and trying to be heard. I don't know about you, Jimmy, but I walked JCK last year for the first time, I think ever, right? Because I've had years and years and years of showing up. I'm either in a ballroom,
behind the case.
I'm either in a ballroom or I'm in a booth. And to actually walk that show and comprehend the sheer vastness of the number of folks trying to do business with a smaller and smaller base of retailers, that's a really big issue. So,
and that's not cheap to set up a booth there.
Set up a booth anywhere can be remarkably expensive. It's all relative, of course, but it does give you a sense for how many people are in this business on the supplier side. Again, competing for the attention of a shrinking base of retailers. And then I think, Jimmy, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention, most vendors and brands that I know are good people. And they want the best for the retailers. They have this silly notion that if the retailer is successful, they too might be successful. I don't know where they got that from, but they have this really interesting notion. And in order for that to happen, you've got to have transparency. You've got to have data sharing. You've got to have automation of replenishment. And so, in other words, stuff that's just absolutely, as simple as it gets, just business 101. It is remarkable how many retailers are resistant to that even today. And I think that's something that absolutely fries many of the vendors, because you get something that's going, you get something that's working, and then you continually put these roadblocks in ensuring that you're feeding, what's already working. So I think that those would be some of the things.
Can I ask a dumb question?
Only if I can give a dumb answer.
The dumb question is, what do vendors do with returns? I mean, obviously, back in the rotation, but what do they do with returns?
I mean, the answer is all of the above, right? That you can, in some cases, you would think this would never happen, but you get returns of product that are actually good selling products. And so, you're able to refurbish them and get them back out again and be able to sell them. In other cases, depending on the condition of the product or whether it's active or inactive inventory, it's going to be melted. So it really depends. And in some cases, extreme cases, they're just eating it. They're just eating it because whatever the construct of the metal or the stones may be. So the answer is all of the above. It's never a good situation, I can tell you that.
Yeah. Do they ever sell it to like Wilkerson or like a closeout kind of place?
I can't speak to Wilkerson or anybody else in terms of where it might go, but there are certain places where you can offload inventory, but there's no massive pipeline of obvious places to get rid of, sort of like clothing, right? We can go to TJ Maxx and Marshalls and stores like that, and you can find last year's designer brands, and if you're willing to look and what have you. There's no
Yeah.
real obvious places like that for jewelry, and especially not branded jewelry, because the brands wouldn't want to see their product.
Sure. Absolutely. Right. That's a given.
Off-price environment. Yeah.
So, okay. So I was going to say it's turning into show season, but really it's show season all year long now. We're going to jewelry shows. We're going to buying shows. We're going. What should we do to create good relationships, good partnerships with vendors? What should retailers have in mind when they're walking up to the booth, or even before they go to the show?
I mean, I think if you're walking, look, there's, I would imagine it certainly would be true in my case if I had it, that a certain amount of your time at trade shows, you want to see what's going on, right? You want to do a little scouting, if you will. Like I'm a baseball scout. I'm going ahead, looking at younger kids to see what's going on.
What booths are real busy?
What's that?
What booths are real busy and what people are talking about.
There's certainly an element of that whole notion of social proof. If all of these guys are doing it, then I might want to have a hard look at it. But if you're getting to Vegas and you don't already have a plan, and you haven't already communicated with the vendor or the brand what your expectation is for the time you will spend with them, then I don't know what to say, because why would you do that? Why would you go and not have certainly your top vendors where you have your appointments and you're letting them know what it is you want to accomplish in those appointments, including I want you to share with me what the new product is and what the key price points are and where you think they fit into my business. Here's my report so you can see what's working, what's not working, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that having a plan before you ever get on a plane, that's absolutely huge. That shouldn't be something that you just sort of arrive at when you get to a trade show.
Yeah, and we got to put a plug in here for Sherry. Sherry is Peter's wife, and she is at the Edge Retail
Academy. Yeah, Edge Retail Academy.
And if Peter, it's 2024, and I still see people walking up to booths and buying with emotion as opposed to good hard data. And I tell you what, get with Sherry, get with the folks at the Edge Retail Academy, and they will help you with that immensely. I could go on for a long time talking about it, but
let me put a quick qualifier on it. There's no problem buying with emotion. We sell with emotion in our retail stores, but ought to be. But it ought to be within the confines of a plan, right?
Sure.
So at some level, if a vendor shows me a whole bunch of new product, I still want to be drawn emotionally to some part of that and say that's for me, that makes sense because I have an intuitive sense about it, but within the confines of actually having a plan.
Sure. And I would always have a fudge. There always be a fudge budget, Yeah,
exactly.
20% or 10% that I know this, I'm taking a gamble on. And, for me personally, it was buying within the bell curve. I'm buying within the top 2/3 of my bell curve. Everything else that's out here on the outlying factors, I'm not gonna reorder. But and that bell curve wasn't necessarily skews. That bell curve was price point and maybe style. Okay.
Right.
But anyway.
I mean, that's a great point.
These are good ideas for more podcasts. We're going to talk about
and I think at some point we can have Sherry join us and get into the weeds on some of this stuff. But I think that point should not be lost that you just mentioned there is, and I think sophisticated retailers do it, but I know for sure all retailers don't do it. Is go blind on the product for a second and have a look at where's the activity within a given area, whether it's bridal or whether it's bands or whether it's jewelry. Whether it's timepieces, where's the activity from a price point standpoint, and where might the holes be from a price point standpoint as well? So having a plan, being communicative, being fair, and understanding that that the vendor side and the branded side, they're trying to make a living too, right? They're in the business of selling. They shouldn't have to apologize for that. And if Sherry says it to me over and over and over when she had her business, vendors and suppliers were really happy to work with her on rebalancing and returns and things of that nature, because she demonstrated on an ongoing basis good habits. It's as simple as that. If you're demonstrating really good habits on an ongoing basis, you have every right to ask the vendor or brand supplier to be there for you. If you're not demonstrating good habits, and then you're showing up at a show, perhaps even without an appointment, you just walk in and whatever, then it puts them in a tougher situation. So
appointments are huge. Appointments are huge for vendors, right? Absolutely huge.
Yeah. They really are. If you think about the show, I mean, think about thousands of people walking around in luxury and JCK. If everybody says, "I'll swing by," how do you do that? I mean, how does that actually work? Because the idea that somebody's going to be the right somebody is going to be available when you swing by doesn't make an awful lot of sense.
They've got to eat, they got to sleep, they got to go to the bathroom, and you absolutely.
And certainly with the vendors that sort of bring home the bacon, so to speak, why would you not have appointments with them to be
absolutely no? And I'm glad you brought that up, because I've shown up at shows without appointments, and I thought, I'm not getting anything done. I'm not talking to the right person. So, well, Peter, I appreciate this. Every time we talk, we come up with 10 new topics. So this is exciting. But I hope this helps all of us understand a little bit about what it's like from the vendor side to be able to meet your needs, to be able to create a partnership with you. And it's just it's beautiful to have this. So
it can be win-win. It's it's simple as that. It can be a win-win for everybody. Win-win-win, vendor, retailer, customer.
The Business of Jewelry podcast is brought to you by me, Jimmy DeGroat at Train Retail, and Peter Smith of the Retail Smiths. Subscribe to this podcast simply by clicking on the subscribe button. I think it's right down there. And we'll see you next time.